What is the reaction in Washington to this press conference, especially to his repeated mentioning of fake news?
Well, fake news is not fake if the information is real, and Donald Trump did not rebut the actual underlying information, and that's what people in Washington are talking about right now. Across party lines, there's a deep bafflement regarding what was seen yesterday in the press conference. Certainly, Republicans are holding the line as best they can and not necessarily going for investigations right now in Congress about Russia's involvement in the American election and the Trump campaign's possible connections to that. But there's deep unease about these kinds of accusations and arguments, and certainly amongst Democrats, there's a rising level of deep concern and anger, some could argue, and you see it in the discussion, in the public debate, a frustration about how the president does not seem to want to own up to some of the actions of his national security advisor, and is instead saying that the media is the problem, not the actual activities that we have seen underway.
Well, from my perspective, watching here in China, I see a bit of an element of truth on both sides. For instance, when he's talking about CNN, what we're seeing indeed is one-sided lambasting of President Trump and his policies. And as he said, the ones who are support or seem to be supporting his stance have been criticized vehemently. And on the other hand, Trump has indeed said, or members of his team has indeed said things which make people feeling very fishy about the truthfulness of these statements. For instance, when we compare the number of people attending the inauguration ceremonies, in my eyes, there are a bit of element truth on both sides. What is your take on that?
Well, it's a big problem for our democracy when the president and the press are going at it in such a direct way. But right now, the concern is that the oversight of the president and of the administration is not being performed actively by the Congress. And as a result, the media, the independent media guaranteed in our Constitution, and the courts as well, those are the two avenues where there's real oversight and checks and balances in the system. We saw the courts play a role in the recent Muslim ban that got held up in the courts. The president announced yesterday, or quietly announced, that they were going to withdraw that ban, that executive order, and rewrite it. So there has been some oversight. But this fight with the media and what we saw yesterday in public, sort of delegitimizing what the media says, is part of a strategy, because when there is criticism coming from the media, if one can put it all in the basket of being fake information, then the real information in those critiques gets lost. And that's a real problem for our democracy.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador Heumann, let me come to you now. We know this Munich Security Conference is underway in your country, and actually the three key words for this year's security conference is post-truth, post-West, and post-order. Why do you think they have put the post-truth in the first place? What do you think is post-truth?
Yeah, you're right. It's remarkable that for this conference in Munich, which is about to start, I think, this evening, it's the first time that they choose such a subject, which is not a strategic or a subject. I think I prefer the term post-truth because it indicates that we have a fundamental problem here. It indicates that we had an era, let us call it the liberal order, which was supposed to be based on truth. And post-truth means we are entering a new era about which we don't know nothing. But indeed, this conference in Munich is about the liberal order and about the challenge to this order which was posed by the new American administration. But it also indicates some power shifts in the world which have originated much earlier.
Mm-hmm. Joe, now let me come to you again. Now, What President Donald Trump said during the press conference, another thing he said is this, his new administration working like a fine-tuned machine. A lot of people are laughing at it on the Twitter, on the social media. But on the other hand, I think he also had an element of truth there, saying his appointment of his cabinet members have been blocked and deliberately by the opposition in the Congress. What is your reaction to that?
So that is a typical argument that every president makes, and it's a fair one, that there is difficult oversight in the Senate for getting nominees through. The problem with this argument for the Trump administration is that many of their nominees did not get their ethics paperwork in on time, did not have the rigorous review of the committees that has been traditional in the Senate, and his key appointments are getting through. I think where the dysfunction and the concern is right now, however, is that the National Security Advisor was essentially fired earlier in the week. The replacement designated or picked by President Trump just turned the job down. So we have a real vacuum right now at that level, and we also don't have nominees even for deputy secretaries at state and at defense and other key agencies. So the process coming out of the Trump administration has been slow to take off, certainly, but it's certainly not just the Congress that is the one to blame in this instance.
Well, according to what Trump said during the press conference, General Flynn did not do anything fundamentally wrong by talking to the Russians. He did talk to the Russians, and actually Trump said if he wouldn't have done so, he would have instructed him to do so. And that is in stark contrast with what many are interpreting on the U.S. media, what is written in the Logan Law, which forbids private individuals to conduct diplomacy. What is your reaction to Trump's siding with Flynn on this?
So there are two key issues at play here. The first is if he did nothing wrong, why was he let go? Why was he fired? Was it just because he withheld information from the vice president, or was there something substantively problematic? The second is that apparently he's being investigated by the FBI, and he did not provide full, truthful information to the FBI is what is being discussed publicly. That may be a problem as well. But we only have one president at a time, and we saw in the final month of the transition oftentimes a conflict between President Obama doing actions and the incoming administration engaging. Now, if the National Security Advisor designate, Michael Flynn, had been speaking to the country that was being sanctioned by the current administration at the time, and essentially saying, don't worry, we'll take care of it, that is coming up to a line that is very problematic and undermining the national security positions of that president at that moment. Mm-hmm. And so substantively, I do think that there's a problem here that we have to be concerned about.
Ambassador Heumann, what is your take on the kind of scuffle that is taking place in the United States concerning the position of the National Security Advisor now that there is a vacuum? What does it say about the kind of security relationship between the United States and NATO at this particular juncture?
Yeah, let me first, if I may, comment on what's going on in Washington. I've spent, by the way, as a diplomat in total 8 years in Washington at the German embassy. I've never seen such, to this extent, such a disarray. But let me get back before I get to NATO, to Russia. What I'm concerned about, why do we talk so much about what General Flynn said or what he didn't say? Why don't we talk about the interests, the relationship between the US, the future, and Russia, for example? What are the common interests? This is the kind of strategic discussion we should have in this respect. On NATO, again, there were contradictory statements on NATO. We had the president saying, I think some weeks ago, that NATO is obsolete. We had Defense Minister Mattis in Brussels telling us that NATO is indispensable for the United States. So it's very important to know what we can make out of this. One thing is for sure, and this is the policy of burden sharing. This is a a real concern from both sides that we have a real burden sharing between the US and Europe. And we should talk about these basic questions and not about who said what and when.
Indeed, this whole thing about fake news has
and
been...
let me just get back to...
Yes, please
yeah.
go ahead.
Yes, why I said earlier in the beginning, I said it's for us, it's a fundamental question. It's not only to find out who said what, but it's really a fundamental question. And because fake news is a way of influencing the political agenda. This is why it's dangerous. And we take it very seriously. And you talked about, I think, the German domestic discussion about fake news and the role of social media in it. Yes, it's true. We've closely followed the campaign in the US and the obvious efforts to influence the campaign. We're not sure whether it's from the Russian side or not, but in any case, in Germany, we had some months ago a hacking of the parliament, the German Bundestag, and we know about the information that were stolen this way, and there is a concern. As you know, we have an election campaign this year. Yes. We have election in September. There's a real concern that fake news will play a role in our national German election campaign.